Welcome to the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
Welcome in, listeners, to the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking everything college hoops. Could have been anywhere else in the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus. We appreciate that. Here's hoping we're feeling your sports void a tiny bit while we're longing for the return of sport. We're trying to run down a number of interesting, monumental, intriguing teams from this past college basketball season and teams that might make a similar impact the following college basketball season. And one of those teams is the Richmond Spiders. So we brought in John O'Connor, who covers Spider Sports for the Richmond Times-Dispatch. You can check out his things over at timesdispatch.com. Dispatch. And please give John a follow on Twitter at RTD, all capital, and then John O'Connor, John spelled with an H, all lowercase, no hyphen. So please give him a follow on Twitter as well. John and I discussed Coach Mooney and the transformation of what's happened and transpired during his career and his tenure as the head coach of the Richmond Spiders. Talked about their big star, Blake Francis, and his huge impact and improvement during his redshirt season. John and I also discussed style of play and what Coach Mooney decided to switch up this year on both ends of the ball. And that yielded tremendous results, obviously, with a 24-7 record. Talked a tiny bit about the local kid, Nick Sherrod, and his selflessness as a student athlete and the evolution of what type of student athlete that he's become on the court, all the roles that he's filled for the Spiders during his career. We definitely got into a little bit, which was a great discussion of NBA draft visibility and just how different that might look and why student athletes are still putting their name into the NBA draft to get further exposure, even when that exposure might be slightly veiled under current situations. If you really like what you're listening to, please don't forget to give a podcast a follow at SES Podcast, Efficiency of Keystrokes, of course, on Twitter. And please give Mike a follow over on Twitter at Randall Rant. He is insightful, entertaining, and educational, all in one nice, tidy little present. And if you really like what you're listening to, go ahead on your podcast consumption vehicle of choice, leave a kind review for the podcast. And don't just leave it for the podcast, leave it for the unbelievably kind guests that we have, just like John. Really thank John for his time. Really thank John for his knowledge. And again, please don't forget to check out his stuff over at the Times-Dispatch. Does an unbelievable job over there, and he's been covering the team since 1981. You're not going to find more insight on the Richmond Spiders. I'm talking to John like we did. So we hope you enjoy the conversation, and we'll catch up with you before you know it. Welcome back in, listeners, to the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we're always talking everything college hoops, and we're trying to give you your sports fix by recapping and looking forward with a couple of programs inside our sport. And one of those programs that surprised and snuck up on everybody were your Richmond Spiders. So we brought in John O'Connor from the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and he's going to walk us through the success that the Richmond Spiders had this past season and just what might be on the horizon for next season. John, thanks for joining the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Of course. Very pleased to chat some Spiders basketball. How are you and the crew holding up down in the Commonwealth?
Everything's good. Yeah, I guess we're like everybody else, just plowing forward and kind of counting the days till we get back to where we want to be.
That's a nice phrase to put it. Normally people would include the phrase normal, but I think how we want it to be sounds pretty accurate.
Well, we're getting there. Hopefully we're getting there day by day.
Day by day, slowly but surely. So inside your conference and inside your state and inside your city, one of the teams that had a whole bunch of buzz surrounding it was VCU, and rightly so, but maybe that buzz should have been surrounding your squad, the other A-10 program housed in Richmond. Was the fan base expecting this type of performance this season, like a possible at-large bid for the big dance? And talk about the VCU Richmond game. Is it something similar to like Lipscomb and Belmont, or is it something different?
The University of Richmond did sort of sneak up the standings for two reasons. And the first is the Spiders were a little bit better than folks thought they would be, primarily because of the arrival of Blake Francis, a 6-foot junior guard who transferred from Wagner and sat out for a year. Nobody was really sure what sort of impact he might have on this team that returned mostly juniors. He had a big impact. He scored about 18 points a game, led the team, really gave some offensive aggressiveness that Richmond needed, in addition to some defensive grit that the Spiders had been lacking. He kind of put them over the top in a way. They were coming off 2 20-loss seasons. Everybody thought they'd be better. I don't think most folks thought they'd be as good as they were, which was 24-7 good, 14-4 in the A-10. The other reason that Richmond snuck up on folks is because the league was down a little bit.
Sure.
You mentioned VCU was expected to be very good, picked to win the league. They really struggled. Injuries and other things came up. It just never got any real traction in the league. Davidson unexpectedly dipped. They were also supposed to be very good last season. So you remove those 2 schools from the top tier, and Richmond was able to elevate. To the surprise of most people, I think Richmond was picked 6th or 7th in preseason, depending on what poll you looked at. So, yeah, it was a surprising year in some respects, and for a couple of different reasons.
Well, you had wins over Wisconsin, who came on strong the second half of the season, and you had a win over a Vandy team with a future NBA first-round pick in Aaron Naismith. He was very healthy. He put up 34 points and made 7 threes in that overtime win. You had a very healthy 24-7 record, and you were sitting in second place behind future number 1 seed Dayton, and you won 9 of your last 10 games. Richmond was really rolling and trending the proper direction. So before the season ended prematurely, what was the vibe surrounding this team on the sidelines, the practice floor, the locker room, heading into the A-10 tournament with some, adjusted expectations?
The University of Richmond was very confident. They played Dayton a good game at Richmond, losing by 8. They had beaten other contenders. They had gotten Blake Francis back from a midseason injury. He fractured his collarbone and missed 4 or 5 games. They were really developing the chemistry that you'd like to see in March. And Richmond plays with a style that's not easy to prepare for. They were thinking, as they do every year when they go into the tournament under Chris Mooney, the coach who's been there 15 years, that they can really give some teams problems, not only in the A-10 tournament, where preparation time is very short, but in the NCAA tournament, where preparation time is very short. And any team they would have faced had they made the NCAA tournament would have been very unfamiliar with Richmond. It's a Princeton-like offense. Chris Mooney played at Princeton, but it certainly is not a slowdown. It emphasizes backdoor cuts, three-point shot, more than anything, a big man who can really distribute the ball from the high post. All of those things are important to what Richmond does. They did it well this year, not only on the offensive end, but they switched defenses. The first 14 years that Chris Mooney was here, he played sort of a matchup, a hybrid type thing. Very effective through the first maybe 10 or 12 years. The last 2 years was poor. And he decided to go straight man-to-man. People were unsure how that might develop. But they became a pretty good defensive team by the end of the year. So Richmond was very confident heading into that A-10 tournament. They didn't get to play a game. They had a bye into the quarterfinals, and the tournament was canceled the day before they were supposed to play.
The story that you tell there just sounds so similar to many of our other guests that we talked about, where the anticipation for the opportunity to play that game, whether it be a tournament game inside your conference or just to play inside March Madness with your invite, it just the uncertainty and the unknown. And you mentioned a couple of the players, and Blake Francis was the guy. I mean, he scored double figures in every game but one this season. He averaged over 20 over your Final Five contests. John, maybe talk about one thing that the listeners might not know about Blake's, success, and just how great was he this season? What's one thing that made him so great after that sit-out year?
That sit-out year is the way I answer.
Right. Okay.
He is from Northern Virginia, and he was a very, very good player on a very, very good high school team that won a state championship. But he was and is a 6-foot off guard. So there was some hesitation among recruiters about how he might fit into a Division I program. He had one scholarship offer coming out of high school, and that was at Wagner. And he took it, and he went up there and did not play much as a freshman, and then really emerged as a sophomore. After his sophomore year, he decided he wanted to try to play at a higher level. He transferred to Richmond, and as you recall, Gus, at that time, it was reasonably common that players who transferred would get waivers and would have the ability to play right away. Now, he was moving back to his home state. His parents both went to school in Richmond, though not at Richmond, and there was a possibility that some sort of waiver filed on his behalf would be granted, and he could play immediately. He chose not to pursue the waiver because he was very interested in improving. He knew he had to improve to play at the A10 level, and he spent that off season practicing with Richmond when the season was going on and getting better. What we saw this past season looked nothing like a player who had one scholarship offer coming out of high school. So Blake Francis's improvement is on Blake Francis. He really improved his game, improved his shooting. He's terrifically quick. He's the one fella on Richmond's team who can get his shot at any time. And once he figured out his role in this offense and his teammates figured out his role in this offense, Richmond played great.
It sounds like his story is very similar maybe to Malachi Flynn or somebody in the Gonzaga program where that redshirt year really benefited and the coaching staff and the student athlete totally took advantage of that opportunity of that redshirt year and paid attention to certain components of their game that they really needed to improve on. And the results speak for themselves this season. He was absolutely phenomenal. First team all conference type player and really exploded and became your stud. His buddy, his running mate, Jacob Gilliard, is the point guard. He is an annoying pest in the very best way. He averaged over 3 steals a game on the defensive end, almost 6 dimes, solid shooting metrics across the board. Now, college hoops allows for a student athlete like Gilliard with his physical profile to succeed in massive ways. So can you just talk about how important the point guard is playing next to, a star like Francis, how important he was on both sides of the floor?
Yeah, sure. When Chris Mooney got to Richmond in 2005, and he did play that matchup zone, he was really committed to taller guards. He didn't sign anybody shorter than about 6'4" for a couple or 3 years after he got here. The theory being, in that matchup defense, you switch on all screens, and if you're at least 6'4", you can handle pretty much anybody on a switch. Chris didn't want to do much with smaller guards who would get beaten up on these switches. And then he had a player by the name of Kevin Anderson back 2010, 2011. A 5'10" guy from, I believe he was from Tennessee somewhere, very, very, very lightly recruited, but fast, gutsy, a lot of great leadership qualities, and became the A10 player of the year in 2010. That sort of changed the way Chris Mooney decided to recruit. Since then, he's had a number of quality smaller guards. Kevin Anderson, I take it back, was from Atlanta, and he had 2 or 3 other 5'9", 5'10" guards who really, really, really played well as spiders. Gilliard is 5'9", and the latest addition of these small guards who have really helped Richmond. Led the nation in steals, you said, great ball distributor, super fast. These steals that he makes almost always seem to convert into transition baskets, easy baskets, and he's a good leader. Working on his outside shot on and off in the last couple of years, but gets to the basket despite being 5'9" and finishes. He's been a great addition to Richmond's program. He'll be heading into his 4th season as a regular now.
So impactful on both ends of the floor. And you mentioned leading the nation in steals. And yeah, he had a number of those pick 6 steals, if you will, that led to easy baskets on the other end. And you mentioned previously, John, that you need that high post man that's going to make great decisions inside the offense that Coach Mooney's trying to run. And Grant Golden is exactly that. He reminds us of Brad Miller of the Bulls, a good shooter, superior passer, high game IQ. Getting that quality paint touch with Golden at the high post creates space for your talented backcourt so they can scoot around. And he's got some of the best hair going in college hoops. Talk about what Grant brings to the offense and why it's so important to have that big man inside the Princeton offense, especially somebody as skilled as Golden as far as distributing, shooting the ball, and making superior basketball decisions.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, Gus, is it just spreads the floor. If you bring a big man outside, you bring the big defender outside. Now, Grant's advantage is that not only can he pass from the perimeter and has a pretty good shot from 15 feet in, he's also a really powerful guy who can score in the low post if that's what needs to be done. And he's every bit of 260 pounds and 6'10". Great left hand, good moves around the basket. So when he comes out, you must come with him or he will hurt you with a 15-foot jump shot. And when you come out, there's the opening in the middle for backdoor cuts and other screens inside. And, you know, the other power player on Richmond's team is Nathan Ko. And when Grant Golden gets double teamed, Nathan Ko seems to get a lot of easy layups. So having a big piece that can move outside, pass, shoot, and dribble, tremendously important for Richmond. And if there's one guy who is the indispensable player for how Richmond plays, it's Grant Golden because of those reasons.
And Golden is one of the three spiders that are gathering intel during the NBA draft process here, John. That's something that's kind of new for your program, but not something new for underclassmen on the whole in the sport the past 3 or 4 years. That's just kind of how it goes. The draft process this year is a little skewed this spring due to current circumstances. So with all these elements, is the feel that all three are going to return for that final season, maybe make another run next season and complete some unfinished business, maybe continue that 9 out of 10 game winning streak and that vibe? Coaches always want to get older, and if these guys return, the Spider team would be as old if everybody returns, right, John?
That's correct. There's no reason to believe any of those three guys, Blake Francis, Grant Golden, or Jacob Gilyard, who all submitted their names into the pre-draft pool, will be leaving. I talked to an NBA scout the other day who was lamenting on the kids' behalf that they're not going to be able to really be seen because there won't be any of these workouts at NBA facilities. There won't be any interviews with NBA executives, as there usually are through this pre-draft process because of the pandemic. What they're going to get pretty much is an evaluation based off their junior seasons. Essentially, this is what each of those three players was after anyhow, because they're not NBA players, and I think they understand that. What they are is very capable professional players at some level, overseas or G League or something like that. And I believe what they did this spring was essentially plant a seed for next spring. They want NBA coaches, NBA executives, NBA scouts to have their name in mind. They want European scouts to have their name in mind. Next spring, when it's time to find a job for these guys, they would like some sort of easy entry into a European league or a G League or something like that, because these scouts are aware of them. They won't be new names. By putting their names in this year, sort of makes scouts aware, hey, Richmond had a nice season, 24-7. They got three guys in this pool. Let's check it out. So what they're doing is sort of getting ready for next year, this year.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you use the word visibility, and I think that's a key component to how the draft process is working or not working, or has been altered this season, that the visibility is going to be, for lack of a better term, not there. And you're going to get in interviews and information, but it's not going to be the same process that has been in past years. But you're right. Like all three of those players are professional basketball players, as we like to say, but they just might not be NBA starters, but they're professional basketball players somewhere in the world. You're totally right. Now, one of the things that has to work with your offense is some floor spacing. And these offensive alleys, the backdoor cuts don't work without proper floor spacing. And Nick Sherrod, even playing less minutes this season, his shooting metrics hit a career high. His turnover numbers snuck under 1 a game. He can guard multiple positions, much like you mentioned earlier in the conversation with his size and strength. How important is Sherrod on both sides of the ball for the Spiders to complement and make all the things happen with that new man-to-man defense and that Princeton offense?
Nick is a local kid from Richmond, and he's really played several different roles since he got to the University of Richmond because of what the team needed. He's known now primarily for his perimeter shooting, which is very good. And you mentioned the spacing that is so important for Richmond. He is the fella, the sniper, who at most often is able to benefit from people bunching up inside on Grant Golden or chasing these cutters. Often Nick Sherrod's alone on the wing. His progress as a player has been notable because he has played inside for Richmond, predominantly as an inside defender in years past when they really, really were hurting for some muscle inside. He's only 6'4", but he played inside defense very well when they needed it. He's been an inside scorer at times for Richmond over the years because of their lack of inside players at that time. But he's evolved more into their fella on the wing who's available when defenses concentrate on other players or other aspects of Richmond's offense. He's been a very reliable three-point shooter. So he's another one of these guys heading into his senior year to be a very valuable piece to what Richmond does.
Well, yeah, when you shoot at 43% from three-point land, I'd say he's valuable without question. He'd be valuable on any program, but especially for what the Spiders try to do. And the architect of all of this is Coach Chris Mooney. The transformation of Coach Mooney is kind of remarkable as well, John. I mean, he's gone from like paid billboards questioning his job to now being, I'm sure he was on the short list for that Wake Forest and ACC job. How things can tilt in a season, huh? That's kind of tricky. So what are some of the elements or characteristics that Coach Mooney holds that allowed success this season with the Spiders after facing a bit of turmoil, like you mentioned, with those 2 20-loss seasons? What are some of the characteristics and elements that Coach Mooney holds that allowed that success to transpire?
I think Chris's story involves sort of a speed bump right in the middle of his career at Richmond. He got here in 2005, and the program really needed a lot of work. He had a completely different philosophy and playing style than Jerry Wainwright, who preceded him as Richmond's coach and moved on to DePaul at that time. And Chris brought a more fluid, everybody needs to pass, shoot, and dribble philosophy. And it took him a couple or 3 years just to get his guys into Richmond, accustomed to what he wanted to do. And they got it rolling. 2009, 2010, 2011, they went to the tournament 2 of those years and won 20 games all 3 of those years. They really had momentum moving. He lost a very, very good senior class and did not recruit well for 3 or 4 years. Really struggled to bring in people who were of equivalent talent. And then the guys he left had some attrition problems because of that. Fellas saw that they really weren't perhaps A-10 players, moved on, tried to address that with graduate transfers, and it just did not work. Richmond was young for 3 or 4 years in a row. Finally, he got this group he has now. In a way, he got a couple of breaks, and that Sherrod suffered a knee injury 2 years ago, sat out a season. Now he's back as a fifth-year senior. Grant Golden had a heart procedure as a true freshman after playing in 6 games. He took a red shirt that year. So he will now be a fifth-year senior. Blake Francis transferred, sat out a year. He will be a fifth-year senior. So he has all these fellas who are coming back who are 23, 22 years old. This is sort of the apex of the planning process they had going on out there. This is a little bit different, it appears from the outside, than the last time around when Richmond was going to the tournament in 10 and 11, in that it appears Chris has recruited much better. And he has some younger players who are very promising and probably will drop a little bit after this strong senior class leaves, but they shouldn't drop to the level that they did previously. So it just looks like his recruiting has gotten better. Richmond has upgraded its facilities. It's in the process of building a practice facility. So it looks good for Richmond. You know, good league. League seems to be stable. Coach seems to be stable. And the roster seems to be stable. Three good things to be stable as Richmond moves forward.
Well, I think that noise you hear, I think that's Richmond Spider fans kind of cheering while they're listening to the podcast or clapping. I think they're applauding where this program could be headed next season, and maybe what was on the horizon for this particular season that ended in such an odd way. So let's go there, John. That sounds good. Like once healthy, once Francis got back healthy, your squad could get out and run with anybody. They can win a slow dance affair with grace. I guess you can own some diversity inside your playing style. You can win a slowdown situation like you did with Whiskey, or you can go into the 90s with an SEC team like you did with Vandy. Next season, John, could be pretty special. Play fortune teller for the listeners out there. Do you think this team can replicate the success that it had this past season and maybe even usurp that and go to a Dayton-type level and find its way inside some national rankings, garner some Sweet 16 or Final Four chatter, not dissimilar from your fellow A-10 program Dayton next season? Is that what we're looking at if we look into the crystal ball?
I think they'll be as good or better. They bring in a 6'6" transfer from Tulane named Connor Crabtree, who started about half the season for Tulane 2 seasons ago and then sat out last season. They also have now for the second year a freshman, rising sophomore, Tyler Burton, a 6'7" player who's going to be Richmond's best player for a couple of years in the future. He's a very good player. Now Richmond's going to be better. They lost no one from this year's team apart from Jake Wojcik, a backup guard who transferred out.
Right.
Of substance, they really lose nothing. And they add Connor Crabtree. They should be better. Now, of course, in college basketball now, you don't know what everybody else has until November because rosters change all summer long. Eligibility of guys changes all summer long. And I'm sure this year it'll be more pronounced than ever because of the pandemic. So I think Richmond will be better. I think Richmond may be picked to win the A-10, but who knows what's going to go on the floor for Rhode Island or some of these other schools when the season begins. It's just too difficult to predict around the league. But Richmond's going to be good, and this pandemic situation that's keeping people away from campus and away from coaching and away from workouts now, one would assume that Richmond would be disadvantaged less than other programs because of the age and the experience of the players, the stability of the system, and Chris Mooney's tenure at Richmond, now in his 16th year. They shouldn't have to do a whole lot of preseason stuff to get ready, whereas a first-year coach, a second-year coach with a lot of new players might really struggle to get it in gear once the season starts.
That's a superior point, John. I don't think that we've discussed that with other guests. I guess the ingredients for what might be successful next season in this real life situation that everybody's operating in is if you have some older players and you have a coach that's been there for a while and knows the system, that might yield unbelievably unseen dividends for the future season. All right, John, let's get you out of here on 3 fun ones, real quickies. We're going to ask you a taste question, a trust question, and a tunes question. So tastes, is there a craft beer or a brewery that we need to know in or around Richmond, Virginia?
Gus, that's not my thing. I'm sorry I did disappoint you, but I don't lean that way.
Perfect answer. All right, trust. Let's go here. who's one player in the whole entire nation, maybe from inside your conference, but maybe from someplace you've seen viewing other games this season, one player in the nation from this past season that you would trust with a last-second possession to win the game, whether it be with a game-winning shot or a game-winning decision?
There's something about a guard who played at Bradford named Carlik Jones, who is now transferred out of Bradford.
Oh, he's at Louisville with Coach Mack.
Louisville, correct. He has always impressed me as a very mature, calm player. He was the Big South Player of the Year this past year, and I saw him live and in person. Richmond played Radford up in D.C. right before Christmas, and Radford beat Richmond by 15. And he was a big part of that. And I've always liked the way he played. I'll say Carlik Jones. He was the guy I trust.
Wow, okay. We had not heard that as an answer. That's a superior answer, John. And then Tunes. What have you been listening to, or who have you been listening to while you're longing for the return of sports and pumping out some content?
I'm a big Temptations guy. I'm a big 60s, 70s music guy. So you grab anything off the shelf, from the Bee Gees to the Eagles to Otis Redding, and I'll listen to it.
That sounds just about right for this time. John, thank you so much for talking some Spiders hoops with us and educating us on the A10. Please stay safe out there, stay calm, stay strong, and hopefully we can catch up with you next season sometime.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Cheers, Cilantro. God Lazio.
God got you.
I'm addicted to the appetite. It's a